Hello everyone, it's time to review December's 3-card blind main event tournament results. This month we had 258 players join us in the main event, 45 of which were brand new players to the tournament. Across the 258 submissions, there were 170 unique decks used. If we weigh each card submitted by its performance and run it through the Simpsons Diversity Index, we will see that this month was very slightly less diverse than the prior month. This means that the 3-card blind diversity grade for this month is a B+. The most popular card this month was Ancient Tomb, which is an extraordinarily healthy card to see at the top of the popularity list. The fact that it is a mana source that supports many different decks, and that it achieved a modest 50% average score is an indication to me that it was reasonably healthy for the meta. Our second most popular card was Mishra's Factory, which you're going to see several times throughout this video because it performed very well. And finally, I think it's important to mention here that our third most popular card was the recently unbanned Idol of False Gods. When this card was originally banned, a significant part of its power was coming from the fact that it was paired with Disruptor Flute and City of Traders, which are both currently on the ban list. Returning to a meta where it wasn't able to rely on those two supporting cards, it had a very mixed performance, which I suspect is due to a combination of players coming prepared to play against it due to its popularity being predictable because of the visibility of its recent unban, as well as players being unsure what the most powerful combinations for the card might be. All of the other notable trends I will cover as we go through congratulating our winners. In Novice 2, our winners were Jester and Rokotark, who were both playing Cleansing Wildfire, Mishra's Factory, and Mox Ruby. This was a winning deck that we saw in the prior month, indicating that it has the strength to persist through any meta where players are overly reliant on using their lands multiple times or lands that come into play tapped. In Novice 1, our winner was ZodQuest9, who was playing Blast Zone, Fungal Reaches, and Idol of False Gods. This is a completely new and unique take on how to leverage Idol of False Gods. There is also some interesting synergy between Idol of False Gods and Blast Zone, where Idol of False Gods can smoothly power up, while the Eldrazi spawn tokens can be used as additional mana sources to pay for that pricey double X cost that Blast Zone needs to add additional charge counters to it. This was a really impressive deck to find as a novice player, and I'm interested to see both where ZodQuest9 ends up in future months, as well as whether we will see this deck become a more common strategy. In Aspirant 3, our winner was Pizza, who was playing Caracas, Leyline of Singularity, and Student of Warfare. The classic 3-card blind combination of Caracas and Leyline of Singularity continues to be a relevant strategy across many months. We saw the same winning deck across the next 4 pods. Many of you may have seen this coming, but that deck was Mishra's Factory, Mox Jet, and Nezumi Shortfang. In Aspirant 2, our winner was Tom Tanks. In Aspirant 1, we had Andruoff. In Contender 5, we had Rio, and in Contender 4, we had Vivi Blue, all of which were rocking the incredibly powerful Nezumi Shortfang deck that has become an increasingly important part of the meta. In Contender 3, we had a 3-way tie between Krugung, The Number Pie, and Yum, who were all playing Alpine Moon, Hammerheim, and Heartfire Hero. This is a very strong deck that we've seen quite a bit of lately, and with the recent banning of Hexdrinker, Heartfire Hero has become the most popular 1-drop in the format. Because Hammerheim is nearly a mandatory pairing for Heartfire Hero, it doesn't have as many options available for its choice of 3rd card compared to 1-drops that can be used in combination with a dual land. Alpine Moon is a card that can be cast for 1 red, and can earn some free wins against decks that Heartfire Hero would ordinarily be weak to. In Contender 2, our winner was Quarion, who was playing Assassin's Trophy, Golgari Rot Farm, and Treetop Village. This is a fringe deck that we have seen before in the past, but this is the strongest performance we've seen it have to date. Part of the reason for its standout performance is that it was able to beat the runner-up deck, which was a 4-way tie, and also was the deck that won Contender 1, which was Dryad Arbor, Force of Negation, and Mental Misstep. In Contender 1, this was also a 5-way tie between Ardent Z8, Goro Otoro, Quag, Speedy Boost, and Rendell. This was the most popular deck this month and a critical part of the meta. especially at higher elos where it was more commonly submitted. This deck is blatantly vulnerable to any deck that simply plays a depletion land and a 2-drop, but Force of Negation can earn many free wins by simply preventing the opponent from being able to deploy their strategy at all. Moxes are a pretty important part of 3-card blind, but this month the popularity of decks using a Mox plus Mishra's Factory and either some form of disruption or a powerful threat made up a very substantial portion of competitive decks this month. And of course, for decks that were reliant on 1-mana spells, Mental Misstep will generally completely turn off their game plan. The players that chose to submit this deck despite its clear vulnerabilities clearly had a strong grasp of the meta this month and reaped the rewards for it. And finally, our winner in Exemplar this month was Walthrus, who was playing Force of Virtue, Rograk, Son of Roga, and Senyu, Keen-Eyed Protector. This was a deck that we've seen discussed on the Discord server several times, but I think very few people were aware that this deck was potent enough to claim a win at the highest levels of this tournament. The core game plan is to exile Senyu with Force of Virtue to cast it for free. Exile is exactly where we want Senyu to be, because then we can use Rograk to cheat Senyu into play using its effect. At baseline, this is 2 evasive creatures that can chip away at our opponent's life total very early on in the game. But Senyu's ability to exile itself to gain life and Rograk's ability to continue to pull it back into play makes this deck a lot harder to race than it may initially appear to be. Walthrus was the only one playing Senyu this month, and it's really exciting to see a rogue deck like this one claim an overall win for this tournament. This has led to Walthrus becoming our new champion with an ELO rating of 1886. And with that, I'd like to congratulate our winners one more time and move on to discussing the cards that will be included in this month's community ban vote. The first card we will be discussing is Nezumi Shortfang. Given that this card was on the ban list in the past, it isn't a shock to see this repeat offender on the ban vote again. Despite being a well-known deck that many players prepared to play around, it still claimed a first place position in 4 separate pods this month. With its standard deck list being the 3rd most popular deck this month, I suspect many players in this community are ready to see this card back on the ban list. Next up we have Force of Negation, which is here on this list because of its high popularity and strong performance, especially at higher elos. Of particular note, the card is extremely effective at hating out decks that want to use non-land based mana sources. That being said, the card itself and the deck that it was being used in are both extremely vulnerable to other core archetypes within this format. I think the challenging question we need to ask ourselves here is whether the success of Force of Negation was a fluke or quirk of this particular meta, or if decks that rely on non-land based mana sources are such a critical part of the format that we can expect Force of Negation to be reasonably successful across many different metas. Regardless of where you stand on this, I think it's reasonable to say that the direction that the meta will swing in depends strongly on whether Force of Negation is banned or not. I know there are players with very strong opinions about this card, and I suspect this will be a very close vote. Next we have Mishra's Factory, which was the 3rd most popular card this month. There were many different decks that performed extremely well while using Mishra's Factory. Because of the card's incredible popularity and strong performance, now seems like the appropriate time to ask whether we would like to bring down the power level of some of these decks by forcing them to rely on something like Mutavault instead. Mutavault is as potent of a threat as Mishra's Factory, but it loses out the ability to block as a 3/3 that Mishra's Factory has. Swapping Mishra's Factory for Mutavault wouldn't result in a massive change in power for these decks, but this slight reduction in effectiveness might reduce these decks' popularity to more of a healthy level. Next up we have Alpine Moon, which is on this list because of the powerful Alpine Moon Hammerheim Heartfire Hero deck. There was a bit of a debate over whether Heartfire Hero itself or Alpine Moon would be the more appropriate card to include on this list, but ultimately we went with Alpine Moon because its ability to turn off non-basic lands can be a frustrating obstacle for people trying to brew up interesting decks. Regardless of the outcome of this vote, we will continue to see the combination of Heartfire Hero and Hammerheim, but if Alpine Moon is removed from the picture, Heartfire Hero will actually have to fight fair against many decks that Alpine Moon was previously claiming free wins against. And our final card on this list is Idol of False Gods, which was the 3rd most popular card this month and was just recently unbanned. Despite it having a seemingly lackluster average score, the popularity of this card scares me. There was an extremely large spread between the best performing Idol of False God decks and the worst performing ones, ranging from a 73% average score all the way down to a 30% average score. My fear is that the actual effectiveness of this card was masked by the fact that many players submitted extremely experimental lists, perhaps with little to no testing done. I wanted to make sure that members of this community had the opportunity to reban this card as early as possible. And that wraps up all of the cards that will be included on this month's ban vote. Remember that you can participate in the ban vote by visiting the 3-Card Blind website, which will be linked in the description of this video. I think this was a really exciting and interesting month, and I wanted to thank all of you who participated in the event. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you soon.